This afternoon, as part of Black History Month Kingston, we are hosting our Real History Series program, An Afternoon with Marcia Ballard, author of Enslavement-as-Punishment. Reading many early American historical documents, including the United States Constitution, Marcia found it difficult to move past sections 1 and 2 of the 13th Amendment. She wondered why the United States Congress would ratify an amendment to the Constitution to abolish slavery and involuntary servitude, while inserting an exception clause that sanctioned slavery as punishment for a crime and gave Congress the power to enforce the article through legislation. Marcia will share her thoughts on this subject and the path of exploration that led her to the 13th Amendment. She will read excerpts from the book and answer questions about her research and conclusions. Born and raised in New York City, Marcia moved to the Hudson Valley, where she lived and worked for many years, raising 2 sons with her husband, finding employment at and rising through the ranks of the IBM Corporation, suffering the death of her husband, earning a Bachelor of Arts degree in history at SUNY New Paltz, and, after taking an early retirement package, dabbling in the retail sector. In 1996, Marcia relocated to Durham, North Carolina, taking staff positions with companies that supplied administrative support to IBM, then landing a position as a development officer at North Carolina Central School of Law, where she edited the school's annual alumni magazine. Marcia remarried in 2009, retired from the law school in 2012, and prior to the pandemic, spent much of her time in her flower garden, leading a church ministry focused on African-American history, visiting her sons and their families, traveling and reading. It was during the pandemic that she wrote Enslavement as History. I am very pleased to introduce Marcia Ballard. Marcia, you're muted.
Oh, gosh. Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, my apologies. Thank you, Troy Ellen, very much for the introduction. I would like to take a minute to just thank Albert Williams Myers for his support. He wrote the foreword to my book. For his support and his encouragement. And I would like to thank the African Roots, A.J. Williams Myers African Roots Center for giving me the opportunity to discuss my book. As Troy Ellen said, my path to exploration was something where I'm going to be going over. And I would like to start with the Civil War. The Civil War was fought to abolish slavery. When the war ended, April 9th, 1865, with the surrender at Appomattox, it was only about 8 months later that the 13th Amendment to the federal Constitution was adopted. The federal Constitution, the 13th Amendment, abolished slavery and resurrected it at the same time. For me, this was a paradox. What I'm going to do now is read from the introduction of my book about the paradox that I experienced. Page 1. Since my retirement, I've been slowly working on the history of my family. More ambitiously, a book about the history of America for the young grandchildren to understand within the context of our family history. While reading many of the early American history documents, including the United States Constitution, I found it difficult, which is what was stressed earlier, to move past the 13th Amendment, that neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except for the punishment of a crime, was abolished. I was flummoxed. Why would the United States Congress ratify an amendment to the Constitution to abolish slavery and involuntary servitude, and yet insert an exception clause that sanctioned slavery as punishment for a crime? And of course, giving Congress the power to enforce it. Since most state constitutions mirror the federal Constitution, I decided to read over the North Carolina Constitution. And in section 17, addressing the abolition of slavery in the state of North Carolina, there too was an exception clause. Slavery, involuntary servitude, slavery forever prohibited. Involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for a crime, whereas the parties have been adjudged guilty, is forever prohibited. So in conducting further research, I was shocked to discover that over 20 states in this country still had slavery and or involuntary servitude clauses in their state constitutions. What I did was, in the book, I put all of the states that I could find that had it in their state constitutions. And I listed them because to me, it was amazing that not only the federal government, but the state governments had this as well. On page 10 of my book, it shows that there were 2 states that put on the ballots in their 2020 elections the initiative to remove slavery and involuntary servitudes in their constitutions. Utah, Nebraska, Arkansas, and Tennessee. Utah and Nebraska did pass the ballots. Arkansas did not get it on the ballot, and Tennessee is scheduled to have their initiative in 2022. So hopefully 2022 will have Tennessee taking it out of their constitution. So what I want to take time and spend a little bit of time is just a brief historical perspective on the methodology that allowed slavery to move into the Western frontiers. And the page that covers that, it starts on page 11. So I'm just going to read the brief intro to that. Between 1812 and 1848, the United States was experiencing significant territorial expansion. States formed out of the Western territories seeking admission into the Union were admitted in pairs, one free, one slave state. And I was like, that's interesting. And I was like, why are they doing this pairing? And what I found was, it was the most politically expedient way to get enough Southern and Northern bipartisan votes in the Senate to admit new states and preserve the Union. Maintaining a slave state, free state admission policy worked so well that by 1850, there was an equal balance of free states, 15, and slave states, 15. The balance of power tipped when more free states were admitted to the Union than slave states. By the eve of the United States Civil War in mid-1861, with the addition of California, Minnesota, Oregon, Kansas, the number of free states had grown to 19, while the number of slave states remained at 15. Given the disproportionate free/slave states appearing, and add to that Abraham Lincoln's election to the presidency on the party platform that slavery would not be extended to any new territories or states, in addition to other social and political upheavals, it led to South Carolina, followed by 6 other southern states seceding from the Union, thus marking the start of the Civil War. From 1861 to 1865, the northern and southern states were engaged in a bloody civil war to abolish 250 years of enslavement, which started in 1619 on the North American continent. Chattel slavery, changed a person's humanity to property, a thing that labored until death, with no rights and no legal recourse. This type of legal bondage was upheld by heinous laws of perpetual generational enslavement. As the war raged, President Lincoln moved forward, issuing the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st, 1863, under the War Powers Act. The act would not extend past the end of the war and was limited in scope to only emancipating slaves not under Union control. So my research brought me to an essay by Scott W. Howell. It's entitled Slavery as Punishment, Original Public Meaning, Cruel and Unusual Punishment, and the Neglected Clause in the 13th Amendment. This essay was challenging, among other things, how originalists in general would interpret the Constitution. But for purposes of my book, I focused in mostly on the detailed information that Howell had that discussed the conflicts over drafting the 13th Amendment between those senators who wanted to extend all the rights and privileges to the newly freed and those who could not. So in my book, what I did was I wrote a piece on the 13th Amendment, what could have happened under a subheading of freedom, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and what did happen. The first part of what could have happened was the piece I'm going to read right now. And the focus is going to be on one particular senator, Senator Charles Sumner of Massachusetts. Knowing the limits of the Emancipation Proclamation, a faction of the progressive Republicans took the bold step of drafting an amendment to the United States Constitution that would permanently abolish the odious legal right to own another human being. Senator Charles Sumner of Massachusetts, an avowed abolitionist, civil rights, and equal rights advocate, went further and proposed the amendment include language that would elevate the position of the newly freed from enslavement to being, and this is very important, equal before the law. It took me a minute to grasp how remarkable equal before the law clause could have been to the newly freed and their descendants had it been included in the 13th Amendment. And what I said was, imagine being able to experience the right to life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, holding white supremacist institutions, white supremacist individuals accountable if and when they attempted to deny the newly freed their rights under the Constitution, uplifting millions of people who suffered under the yoke of slavery for far too long to finally partake in the myriad of opportunities that this great land had to offer. Finally, at a crucial time in the country's history, obtaining equal rights before the law could have ensured that my ancestors and their descendants the same opportunities to grow and thrive in America as the Europeans and their descendants had had since this country's founding. So I said, what did happen? That was my follow-up to what could have happened and should have happened. And the subtitle is Abolition, then Slavery as a Criminal Sanction. As Sumner's proposal for extending the newly freed people's citizenship and equal protection status before the law was a bridge much too far for most of his fellow lawmakers. In January 1864, the Senate Judiciary Committee rejected Sumner's proposal and chose instead to use the content from a 67-year-old provision from the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, which is that there shall neither be slavery nor involuntary servitude in the said territories, otherwise, other than punishment of a crime, wherefore the party shall have been duly convicted. Sumner protested to this insertion in the punishment exception clause and argued that the punishment provision allowed enslavement as a criminal sanction. And so I asked myself again, how can Congress vote for an amendment adding slavery and involuntary servitude and at the same time basically engage in a bloody civil war over the abolition of slavery? The irony spoke volumes to me. I'm going to read what I call the Sumner prophecy, which I found amazing. Sumner expressed bitter disappointment over the exception clause in the 13th Amendment. He later prophesied in his book, "The condition of the freeman will be deplorable. Exposed to everyday brutality, he will not be heard as a witness against his oppressor. Compelled to pay taxes, he will be excluded from all representation in the government. Without federal, political, and civil enfranchisement enforcement, the security of the emancipation is illusionary. It's a jack-o'-lantern which the poor slave will pursue in vain. Even if slavery ceases to exist, it will give it a place to a condition hardly less galling. There will be serfdom, apprenticeship, peonage, or some other device of slavery. According to the poet, there are different circles of hell, each with its own terrible torment. And the unhappy African will only escape from one of these to another. And all this will be beyond correction or remedy if it is not the onset guarded against in organic law." The prophecy that he made was, to me, jarring, because it showed in detail what was going to happen. That yes, we were going to, abolish slavery, but because we put it right back in as a punishment for a crime, any law, especially state law, that considered the laws that existed before the end of slavery, which were the Black codes, could be brought back in and reapplied, so that you could get arrested as a Black person for just about anything. What I would like to do right now is just to read a piece in doing this research that I found about about what happened to Charles Sumner. That I found very shocking, and very much it happened back in 1856, but considering what happened at the state capitol recently, this could be like a precursor to that event. This was a speech that he had made that talked about, should Kansas be admitted to the Union as a slave state or a free state? And it was on May 19th, 1856. And it was called Crimes Against Kansas. Sumner, in this long speech, identified 2 Democratic senators as the principal culprits in this crime: Stephen Douglas of Illinois and Andrew Butler of South Carolina. He characterized Douglas to his face as a noisome, squat, and nameless animal, and charged Butler with taking a mistress who, though ugly to others, is always lovely to him. Though polluted in the sight of the world, is chaste in his sight. I mean, added Sumner, the harlot slavery. On May 22nd, so this was just a few days after he gave this speech, Representative Preston Brooks from South Carolina entered the chamber and beat unsuspecting Sumner unconscious with the metal tip cane that he carried. So, just so you know, there has been violence in these chambers before. I would like to go to page 27 and 28. At this point, the previous pages talk about the activities and how the other states were trying to get slavery and involuntary servitude out of their constitutions. So you can read that at another time. So on page 27, I talk about knowing your rights and your right to know. And what I'm discussing there is enslavement as punishment should be something that people should know about, especially if they are or have to be part of the criminal justice system. So what I write is knowing your rights the same as your right to know? I believe it is, especially when enslavement as punishment / involuntary servitude exception clauses are in state and federal constitutions. I understand that amending constitutions, be it at the slave, or especially at the state, or especially at the federal level, is daunting. A daunting, protracted endeavor. And as such, and because of slavery as punishment clauses' extent relationship to the American criminal justice system, it is, I believe, critical that until enslavement is completely removed from the US Constitution and state constitutions without any exceptions, that individuals arrested on suspicions of crimes have the right to know and understand fully prior to their possible conviction, especially if they are considering taking a plea, that they can be lawfully enslaved. And what I did on page 28 was I showed an instance where you have the notification of your rights from the Fifth Amendment, which is the Miranda Warning. And my proposal was a notification of enslavement warning taken from the 13th Amendment. And what it says is, just like I'll read the Miranda warning, it says you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed to you. What I proposed was, under due process of law, as state or federal law applies, if you are dutifully convicted of a crime, you could forfeit some or all of your citizenship rights, and as means of punishment, be enslaved and or subject to involuntary servitude. And the point of that was to bring it out into the open, because there's a lot of people that don't know that this exception clause exists in the federal Constitution and in state constitutions. The last part of the book talks about abolition 2.0. And when I finished the book, I was talking about how we need to really start looking at having organizations start challenging the exception clause in constitutions. And a very dear friend of mine, Arminta, sent me a article that she had found where in December of 2020, Democrats introduced legislation to strike slavery exception clause in the 13th Amendment. And right now it's sitting as a resolution in the House, and it's the one for the House is Resolution 104, and the one in the Senate is Resolution 81. So there is activity that is starting, and there are organizations that are looking at this very carefully. And I think it's way past time that it is being looked at, and I'm optimistic that it will, in my lifetime, be taken out of the constitutions of the state and federal government. I have the link. I'm going to give it to Troy Ellen so that she can send it out for people who are interested in what these documents say that are challenging the exception clause. In closing, I would like to quote James Baldwin from his Notes of a Native Son. In the context of the Negro problem, neither white nor Black, for excellent reasons of their own, had the faintest desire to look back. But I think that the past is all that makes the present coherent. And further, that the past will remain horrible for exactly as long as we refuse to assess it honestly. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcia. Very good. I learned a lot, actually. And you read one of my favorite James Baldwin quotes. Thank you for that. Everybody, I will say that if you have any questions or comments, please share them in the chat and I will read them so that Marcia can answer. We have a comment and a question from Addie. I did not know about the use of imprisonment as punishment until I read Marcia's book. And then said, are there examples of this that you have?
And actually in Howell's essay, he discusses very early on about the prison lease program that started. And it was the former slaves who were arrested and put to work on plantations. Some of the plantations that they used to slave at, they were now required as prisoners to work on those plantations. And also a lot of public works were performed by prisoners, again, who were leased to states, specifically in the South, to build roads, clear roads, build roads, work on the railroads, to do these, very labor-intensive activities as prisoners. And I can, if you're interested, I can, send you the essay that he did. And there are quite a few books and papers written on the subject. So I'll definitely get those to you.
I'm assuming you have Addie's email address? Okay.
I do.
Next is Portia writes, I was intrigued about the work of Senator Sumner, astonished to read that he was severely beaten within inches of his life in the Senate chamber. Wow, beaten by Congressman Preston Brooks of North Carolina.
Yes, it was, it shocked me that it happened. And it wasn't even, he wasn't insulting Brooks, he was insulting a kinsman, of his. They came from the same general area in South Carolina. And he snuck up on him. He didn't, come to him face to face. Sumner was writing, finishing up, putting together the materials that he had after his speech. And Brooks just, came up behind him and started beating him in the head until he was bloodied and unconscious. And it took him a long time to recover. He did recover, but it took him almost a year to recover. And it was shocking. And by the way, he was censured. Brooks was censured and reelected. So there you have it.
Politics. Some things never change.
Never change. Never change.
Aretha writes, the chain gang is a form of involuntary servitude. Then Portia writes, I would like to have information on groups that are working on this. I read the part in the book about people taking plea deals. Plea deals have become the norm. Far too many of our African-American men are totally unaware of what they are agreeing to.
That's true. That is very true. There are, I do have a list of organizations. What I will do is I will work with Troy Ellen to get the list out of information on the organizations that are working on trying to remedy this situation. The organizations that I have are also part of the organizations that are listed in this effort with the constitutional amendment change. So I'll make sure that that gets out as well. I'll work with Troy. Mm-hmm.
Once you get the information to me, I will email it to everybody.
I will do that.
Okay.
I will do that, yes.
Taretha writes, although no longer called a chain gang, it still happens today, which is a follow-up on the previous comment.
Yes, yes.
Pam writes, understanding the economics tied into legalized slavery, what objections should we anticipate from federal and state elected officials? I think this is in reference to, you said that they're in the constitutions of many states, but other states are now looking at taking it out. And so
Yes.
What objections should we anticipate from federal and state elected officials?
Well, I think the objections are going to run along the theme of, well, they can't just sit around, they have to do something. And therefore, that's not slavery. There is an expectation that they have to be able to be productive and learn a trade. And these objections come with a very soft sounding reasoning, versus you have prisoners today working, doing factory work. They're not paid the wages that if they were doing that work outside of prison, they would be. They're not getting any kind of, a lot of them, certifications for things that they are learning, or that when they do participate in a particular type of work, that they can't automatically leave prison and go do that work, even though they do it in prison. And I'll give you an example: firefighters that are on the front lines in California. A lot of those firefighters are prisoners. They're eating the smoke just like those other firefighters, but those firefighters have benefits, they have a decent salary that they make, and the prisoners do not. And they are exposed to the same hazards. So the objections, you know, are ones that are talking about how it benefits the incarcerated to do certain things, when in fact it's beneficial to, usually to where the prisons are located, and the work that they do, because there are prisons that are on the stock exchange. So, you know, they're for-profit prisons. And, you know, I think that we just have to appreciate that, you know, what the economic impact is to communities. The positive being, if these prisons are located in white locations, they can count the prisoners in their census. So, you know, that increases their apportionment of tax dollars. But these prisoners are from somewhere else, and their home locations don't benefit at all from a census standpoint. And or from where they're coming from. If you're coming from a place, well, it used to be Harlem, that was all Black, but other areas where they have a high Black population, the young men, for a lot of reasons, go into prisons. They go off into areas that are usually, you know, rural and white, and you're taking the apportionment dollars. That the apportionment dollars go with them to where they go and eventually settle in a prison setting. So the incentive for having these numbers, having these people in prisons is very high. And so, you know, we have to appreciate that we have to challenge that there's nothing, you know, all that redemptive about it, as much as it has always been a business. Slavery was a business. Post-slavery was a business. You know, the prison complex is a business. And, you know, as a business, it has to make a profit. And we have to recognize that the entities that are being utilized to make those profits are human beings. And usually they're Black and brown.
Thank you for that. You made an excellent point. Adrienne writes, Marcia, I am so proud of you. Your book is so relevant today.
Thank you.
Let me say, we should all be, sorry, it's in two parts, so I'm scrolling down. We should all be paying close attention to what's going on in our legislatures. We then have a question from Deirdre. Do you support reparations for descendants of American slaves?
Yes, yes, I do. I do support reparations. I'm not sure that that's ever going to happen, but I do support it. And I'm not sure a lot will happen unless we are not just voting, but participating locally as much as possible in politics and getting our people placed in positions within state political positions, so that we can guard against a lot of shenanigans that go on. And once we do that from a state, local, state, and federal level, then the question of reparations is doable. It's who's in power. If we're never in power, we will never get reparations. I'll tell you that. We won't get anything that we deserve until we sit in seats of power and are able to wield the pen and make it happen. That's the only way it's going, in my opinion, my humble opinion, that's the only way it's going to happen.
Amen to that. We have a question from Lois. Curious about your thoughts on including the passage of the pieces of legislation you speak about as part of the conversation about reparations.
So yes, can pieces of that be folded in? Yes, I think so. I think that, you know, we have to say loud and clear, there is a connection between having slavery in the Constitution, the way it is written, as opposed to having a civil war and not taking it out, but putting it in the Constitution. And we have to understand, why is it still there? And the reason, as far as I can tell, is that it has a function. No one wants to say, oh, well, we really don't use slavery, but well, then take it out. Take it out of the constitutions of the states and take it out of the federal constitution. It doesn't belong there unless it has some kind of nefarious reason for being there.
Thank you. Carolyn writes, thank you, very informative. James Baldwin's comment is so true. It applies to many crimes against humanity that were sanctioned as in the service of progress. We are starting to understand that material progress bought with the ill-gotten gains of inhumanity eventually causes an infection that will kill our country if we don't acknowledge and make whatever amends are possible.
I totally agree. Yes, that's beautiful.
Ken writes, even after the completion of sentences, the economic pain continues because so many people with criminal records are legally barred from many professions, in addition to the general problem of obtaining employment with a criminal conviction.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And again, I would stress that if we are in positions locally and statewide, we can mitigate the laws that continually suppress individuals. We have laws right now where you have sentence reductions, but then you have fines that you have to clear in order for your name to be cleared. So, you know, they're revenue raising entities that have this gloss of somehow being neutral in, you know, in how painful it can be. So we have to be in positions where we don't allow it to happen. We cannot sit back and think that somebody is going to grow a conscience in this country to the extent that it will get the foot off the neck of Black and brown people. It just won't. You know, it's built in. So the only way that we're going to be able to make a change is to elect individuals, to put individuals in positions where they can reverse what has been going on for so long and hold those positions. Because, I mean, power does not concede. You know, Florida, there was efforts before the election to expunge a lot of people's records and allow them to vote. Voting it was deliberate that the federal government said the states will have the power to create their voting systems. Not the federal government, not you know, the Supreme Court. They will get involved, but for the most part, what is already set up is set up at the state level. So in Florida, you had individuals who were, able to vote, the laws that banned them were taken away, but then they had to have, you couldn't have any fines on the books. So there's always something that is layered over something else, that's layered over something else. That's why you could put together an amendment that abolished slavery and put it right back in at the same time. If one cannot understand the elegance of the evil of that, and appreciate then how you have to stay engaged at all times, then, I mean, we're looking at, and this is what I have, that worries me. I have grandchildren, and I know that there are other people's grandchildren that would not want to see my grandchildren succeed. They're not taught, I'll get off on a tangent a little bit, but all that I was doing and the research that I was doing, I would argue a lot of it is not in the schools. People are not being taught this type of information. Children are not being taught this type of information so that they can, have a more robust humanity as they, grow and thrive, so that they don't feel that somehow, that everyone deserves an opportunity. There's no teaching that in the schools. It's lacking. And how this country came about, as Coates would say, Tanisha Coates, through plunder. And so how do you remedy this is to tell the truth, is to say, yes, there was plunder, and no, you can't continue doing this. But until they're able to do that, until that's, becomes part of who we are as a country, I think that we have to, put as many Black and brown faces as possible in seats of power who are looking to make a change for the better.
Teresa has observed privatized prisons are big business. I don't think anyone here would say that's not a true statement. Rachel has written, many in America have been taught to believe that made in USA label means that working conditions are fair, but they are not taught that incarcerated people can be forced to work for corporations or for the state while imprisoned under the exception clause in the 13th Amendment that you have discussed. I appreciate your work to educate about these insane and unjust laws and to push for change. Would you share your thoughts on the role of corporate influence on these laws?
Corporate influence, corporations are in existence to make money. Their moral compass outside of, when they've made enough of what they need to make, they can do charitable work, has very little to do with looking to make change. I'm not making them bad. I'm not making them evil. I'm just saying what they are. They are what they are. They're there to make money for their stockholders, and to make money for the officers at the top. So you know, I don't think that they have policies written to address what would need to be addressed for change. I would not look for that at all. Yeah, I don't want to get too far out on a limb, but there is, you know, corporations became people in the Constitution, and you know, look for the same protections as people. So I think what was it? I can't think of the organization, but anyway, yeah, where they, I think they went under the Fifth Amendment or something like that for having all the rights and privileges of a person.
Wasn't that it was Citizens United?
Citizens United, that's it. So yeah, I think that, you know, that tells you everything you needed to know about it.
Portia writes, a great session. Thanks for bringing this to our attention. Deirdre asked the question, what do you think will happen to the KKK that stormed the Capitol on January 6th?
I would have to say that depending on how influential the Democratic senators are in wanting to ensure that people are held accountable, I would think that they would have enough influence and power to ensure that people were going to suffer the consequences of their actions. But we have to remember that the KKK has been around for a very, very long time. And a lot of individuals who are in law enforcement, you know, also have, you know, connections sometimes to these types of organizations. So I'm not sure. I would have to see some people going to jail at some point, you know, to feel comfortable that there will be consequences to all of those individuals that have been identified.
I find it interesting that some of them are being charged at the state level. Many of them are being charged by the federal government at the federal level, and also being charged by the District of Columbia.
Mm-hmm.
So, and this is happening simultaneously to each person. So they might overcome one hurdle, but they're still faced with two others.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think that that's deliberate, because maybe New York State won't get them, but the district will, you know, so it's very
Mm-hmm.
interesting.
It is. I would just have to, I would be pleasantly surprised to see who is really going to be charged. I mean, I think what some of those senators did was, you know, was treasonous. But I think we need to remember, and this is what I really appreciate about the standards of this country. We had a civil war. We had individuals who were traitors, and nobody basically was held accountable for that. in order to unite this country, quote unquote, the South was able to resurrect itself. And by 1877, when the troops left, it was, their rebuild of doing exactly, to some extent, what they did before the Civil War. But no one was really held accountable. The generals were not held accountable. The forces at work that were part of creating the situation to begin with were not held accountable. And it was always about what's the expediency of reuniting the country. It really wasn't about, ensuring that former slaves were given an opportunity as much as reuniting, so that the Western frontier would be opened up as much as possible. That was, part of the reason for all of that, all of the struggle.
I'm checking. Jordana writes, and I had forgotten about this, so my bad. I had dropped in the chat the link to your book,
Yes.
where your book was available. And Jordana writes, perhaps it could also be ordered from Rough Draft Bar and Books, which is in Kingston, New York, for anyone who lives in Kingston, New York. I know there are people sort of spread out on this
Okay.
but it can be ordered from Rough Draft Bar and Books, and particularly if the order is placed on Monday, February 22nd, it will benefit the African Roots Center. It'll benefit the author because the book has been purchased, and the profits from that day, which they're calling Mission Monday, it's their February Mission Monday, will be donated to the A.J. Williams Myers African Roots Center. So thank you so much for reminding me of that, Jordana. I was so focused on the program and what we had rehearsed that I forgot about the news we got earlier today.
Thank you. That's good to know. That is very good to know.
Carolyn writes, regarding corporations, they are chartered. If we demand that the charters that allow them to function are worded in a way that would hold them accountable for behavior, things could be different. Corporate charters emanate at the state level. The other way to get change is through boycott. As Marcia points out, at this time, primary mandate for a corporation is to make a profit, and there is very little oversight as to how they do that. If the corporate board has a moral code, things can be positive. Otherwise, it is profit above people.
Very true. Very true. That's, yeah.
Okay, I don't see any more questions or comments in the chat, but we can wait for a moment. Again, if you're in the Kingston area, or I guess you could order the book online from Rough Draft. Hold on a moment, I'll be right back. I'm going to get their website address.
Okay, that'll be great.
And there it is. I'm putting it into the chat, but I want to just type.
Okay.
Well, I think this has been an excellent afternoon. I truly appreciate that you wrote the book
Thank you.
and that you shared your journey with us. And then the question and answer period was really interesting and built upon the knowledge that you had shared during your program. So that's very much appreciated as well. I also want to thank everyone who attended this program. It's Saturday afternoon, and we were happy to host you all and glad you could join us. Jordana said, thank you for the informative talk.
Thank you.
And on that note, I want to wish everyone a very good evening and a wonderful rest of the weekend.
Sounds good. Okay.
Goodbye now, everybody.
Goodbye. Thank you.